Commander Zethka stood on the command deck of the orbital defense station, watching his world burn below. The mining planet Kepler 442c had been a peaceful place just 3 months ago. Now it looked like a nightmare painted in orange flames and black smoke. The enemy called themselves the Hive. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They just appeared one day and started destroying everything. The worst part was how they learned. Every weapon the Zelkarian Defense Coalition used against them only worked once. By the second battle, the creatures had adapted. By the third, they were immune. Zethka had been a soldier for 40 years. He had fought in 3 major wars across the galaxy. He had never seen anything like this. His energy rifles were useless now. The Hive had somehow grown armor that absorbed the blasts. His plasma cannons had worked for exactly 2 days before the creatures developed shields. Even their most advanced quantum disruptors barely scratched the enemy anymore. "Sir, we have lost another battalion," reported Lieutenant Veltar from her console. Her voice shook slightly. "The creatures broke through our defensive lines at Sector 7. Zethka closed his 4 eyes and took a deep breath. That made 12 battalions lost in just 5 days. Each battalion had 500 soldiers, good soldiers, soldiers with families waiting for them back on the home worlds. "How many do we have left?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. 3 battalions, sir. Maybe 4 if we count the wounded who can still fight. 2,000 soldiers against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every battle. The Hive had landed with maybe 10,000 creatures. Now their numbers were closer to 50,000. They were using the planet's resources to build more of themselves. Every day they waited, the enemy became more dangerous. Zethka walked to the large window that showed the planet below. He could see the Hive structures growing like cancer across the surface, strange biomechanical towers that pulsed with dark energy, tunnels that spread underground like veins. The creatures were not just conquering the planet. They were changing it into something else entirely. "Sir," Veltar called out, "we are receiving distress calls from the mining stations in the northern continent. The creatures have reached them." "Tell them to evacuate," Zethka said, without turning around. "They cannot, sir." "The Hive has surrounded all the evacuation points." Zethka felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. 3,000 civilian miners were trapped down there. Men, women, and children who had never held a weapon in their lives. They would be dead within hours. "Sir, we could send our remaining forces to help them," suggested Captain Mordex from the tactical station. "And lose our last battalions?" Zethka shook his head. "The creatures are learning from every engagement. If we send our soldiers down there, they will adapt to our remaining weapons. Then we will have nothing left to defend the orbital stations." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew he was right, but it felt wrong to abandon those people. Zethka had made many hard decisions in his career, but this might be the hardest. Save 3,000 civilians and guarantee that billions more would die when the Hive reached other worlds, or let those civilians die to buy time for evacuation of the orbital facilities. "Send an emergency transmission," Zethka said finally. "Broadcast on all coalition frequencies. Request immediate military assistance. Tell them we need reinforcements. Any species, any ship, any soldiers they can spare." Veltar worked at her console for several minutes. "Message sent, sir. Broadcasting on all emergency channels." Now they could only wait and hope. The first responses came within an hour. The Centauri Federation said they could send 2 cruisers in 6 weeks. The Andorian Trade Alliance offered medical supplies but no soldiers. The Vegan Republic said they would consider the request after their council met next month. 6 weeks, next month. The planet would be completely consumed by then, and the Hive would be building ships to spread to other worlds. "Sir," Veltar called out again, "we have another response. It is from a species called humans." I am not familiar with them. Zethka searched his memory. Humans. The name was barely familiar. Some primitive species from the Outer Rim territories. They had just developed faster-than-light travel recently. Their technology was hundreds of years behind the Coalition standard. What do they say? He asked. They say, reinforcements en route. ETA 72 hours. Zethka blinked in surprise. How many ships? Veltar checked her console. The message does not say, sir, but the transmission came from only one source. I think it is just one ship. One ship. From a barely space-capable species. Zethka almost laughed, but he was too tired and too desperate for humor. What could one primitive ship do against the Hive? Their weapons would probably be kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives, the kind of technology the Coalition had abandoned centuries ago. But they were the only ones coming. Everyone else was too afraid, too busy, or too far away to help. Acknowledge their message, Zethka ordered. Tell them we appreciate their assistance. He did not say what he really thought, that one ship would make no difference, that whoever these humans were, they would probably flee as soon as they saw what they were facing, that this was likely a death sentence for whatever brave fools were coming to help them. Still, at least someone had answered their call. In his darkest moment, when the entire galaxy seemed to have abandoned them, some unknown species was willing to try. It would have to be enough. The human ship appeared exactly 72 hours later, just as they had promised. Zethka watched it approach through the orbital defense station's sensors. It was smaller than he had expected, about the size of a Coalition transport vessel, but built differently. Where Zelkarian ships were smooth and elegant, this one looked rough and practical, like a tool designed for hard work. Sir, the human vessel is requesting permission to land, reported Veltar. Direct them to landing platform 7, Zethka ordered. Have a security detail ready to escort them to the command center. Sir, they are not approaching the landing platforms. Zethka looked up from his reports. What do you mean? The ship is heading directly toward the planet's surface. They are not responding to our landing instructions. Zethka moved to the tactical display. The human ship was indeed diving straight down toward the planet. Its angle was far too steep for a normal landing. It looked more like a missile than a spacecraft. Are they having technical difficulties? He asked. I do not think so, sir. Their engine signatures are normal. They appear to be doing this on purpose. The ship screamed through the atmosphere, its hull glowing from the heat of entry. Zethka expected it to pull up at the last moment and find a safe landing zone. Instead, it continued its suicidal dive directly into one of the largest Hive structures. The impact was tremendous. The biomechanical tower collapsed in a shower of alien metal and burning debris. Explosions rippled outward from the crash site as stored Hive materials detonated. The entire northern section of the Hive complex went dark. Did they just... Captain Mordex stared at the tactical display in shock. Crash their ship into the enemy base, Veltar finished. Yes, sir. I think they did. Zethka felt a mixture of admiration and horror. These humans had thrown away their only means of escape to strike at the enemy. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. Are there any life signs? He asked. Veltar worked at her console for a moment. Yes, sir. I am detecting 12 human biosignatures. They are moving away from the crash site. 12? Zethka could not hide his surprise. 12 soldiers? That appears to be correct, sir. 12 soldiers. Zethka had expected at least a full regiment, maybe several thousand troops with heavy weapons and armor support. Instead, these humans had sent 12 people in one ship that they had just destroyed. Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the human survivors, Veltar announced. Put it through. A new voice filled the bridge. It spoke the common galactic language with a strange accent, but the words were clear enough. "This is Squad Leader Martinez of Marine Reconnaissance Squad Delta. We are on the ground and ready for orders. Where do you need us?" Zethka stared at the communications panel. The humans spoke like they had just arrived for a routine training exercise, not crashed their ship into the middle of an enemy base. "Squad Leader Martinez," Zethka replied carefully. "This is Commander Zethka. Are you and your soldiers injured? Do you need medical evacuation?" "Negative, Commander. We are all green and mission ready. Just point us toward the bad guys." The bad guys. Zethka had never heard the Hive called that before. It made them sound like common criminals instead of an unstoppable alien menace. "Squad Leader, I must ask, are there more human forces coming? Other ships?" "Negative, Commander. You asked for reinforcements. We are it." 12 soldiers, against 50,000 Hive creatures that adapted to every weapon used against them. Zethka felt a wave of despair. These humans had traveled across space to die for strangers. It was noble, but pointless. "Squad Leader Martinez, I appreciate your courage, but perhaps you do not understand the situation. The enemy numbers in the tens of thousands. They adapt to our weapons. They learn from our tactics. My own forces have been unable to stop them." There was a pause on the communication channel. Then Martinez replied, "Understood, Commander. Sounds like a target-rich environment. We love those." Target-rich environment. The human actually sounded pleased about being outnumbered by thousands to one. "I am going to assign you to observation duties in the rear areas," Zethka said. "You can monitor enemy movements and report back to us. It will be safer there." "With respect, Commander, we did not fly across the galaxy to hide in the rear, but we will follow your orders for now." The transmission ended. Zethka looked around the bridge at his officers. They all had the same confused expression he was feeling. "Sir," Veltar said quietly, "the humans are moving. They have left the crash site and are advancing into Hive territory. I told them to stay in the rear areas." "Yes, sir, but they are not going to the rear. They are going deeper into enemy-controlled zones." Zethka pulled up the tactical display. 12 small dots representing the human soldiers were moving through the ruined Hive complex. They were not retreating or hiding. They were advancing systematically, moving from cover to cover in a pattern Zethka did not recognize. "What are they doing?" Captain Mordex asked. "I have no idea," Zethka admitted. As he watched, the human dots stopped at various locations. They seemed to be placing something at each stop, then moving on. Their movement pattern was unlike anything in Coalition tactical manuals. It looked almost random, but there was clearly a purpose behind it. "Sir, I am detecting small energy signatures where the humans have stopped," Veltar reported. "They appear to be placing some kind of devices." "What kind of devices?" "Unknown, sir. The energy signatures are very weak. Almost primitive." Primitive. That word seemed to follow the humans everywhere. Their ship was primitive. Their numbers were inadequate. Their technology was centuries behind. Yet somehow they had just accomplished something no coalition force had managed in 3 months. They had struck directly at a major Hive complex and survived. Maybe primitive was not the same as ineffective. The Hive's next assault began at dawn, just as it had every day for the past week. Zethka watched from the orbital station as thousands of biomechanical creatures poured out of their underground tunnels. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single giant organism. "Same pattern as always," observed Captain Mordex. "They will test our defenses, adapt to our weapons, then overwhelm our positions." Zethka nodded grimly. The Hive never changed their basic strategy because it always worked. Why fix something that was not broken? The first wave hit the coalition defensive lines with familiar intensity. Energy weapons flashed across the battlefield as Zelkarian soldiers fought desperately against creatures that seemed to absorb damage without slowing down. But something was different this time. The neat battle lines that usually formed were chaotic. Explosions erupted in random places throughout the hive formation. "What is happening down there?" Zethka demanded. "I am not sure, sir," Veltar replied, studying her sensors. "The small devices the humans placed yesterday, they are detonating." On the tactical display, the 12 human dots were moving in ways that made no sense. Instead of forming defensive lines like proper soldiers, they seemed to be everywhere at once. They would appear in one location, fire at the hive creatures, then disappear before the enemy could respond. "Sir, I am receiving a transmission from Squad Leader Martinez," Veltar announced. "Put it through." Martinez's voice crackled over the speakers, with the sound of explosions and weapons fire in the background. "Commander Zethka, we have eyes on the enemy formation. Requesting permission to engage." "Squad Leader, you are only 12 soldiers. The enemy has thousands of creatures in that assault." "Roger that, Commander. We see them. Permission to engage?" Zethka looked at the tactical display. The humans were positioned directly in the path of the main hive assault. They would be overrun in minutes. "Permission granted," he said quietly. At least they would die fighting. What happened next made no sense according to everything Zethka knew about warfare. Instead of the humans being quickly destroyed, the hive assault began to slow down. Their perfect coordination started to break apart. Creatures that had been advancing in straight lines suddenly began moving erratically. "Veltar, what are the humans doing?" I am not entirely sure, sir. They appear to be firing not at the creatures, but around them, creating patterns of explosions that force the hive units to change direction." On the surface, Marine Williams had discovered something interesting about the hive creatures. They adapted to direct threats very quickly, but they did not handle confusion well. His machine gun was not aimed to kill. Instead, he fired in short bursts that forced groups of creatures to take cover or change course. "Chen, you seeing this?" he called to his teammate. Corporal Chen was crouched behind a pile of rubble that had once been a hive structure. "Yeah, they do not like it when they cannot predict where the next shot is coming from." The hive creatures were designed to adapt to patterns. When faced with the same weapon repeatedly, they quickly developed defenses. But the humans were not using the same weapon repeatedly. Williams would fire his machine gun for 30 seconds, then switch to grenades. Chen would use his rifle, then throw smoke bombs that confused the creature's sensors. Sergeant Rodriguez had found something even more interesting. The biomechanical creatures were connected to each other through some kind of mental network. When he captured one creature and put it in pain, others nearby became distracted trying to help it. "Martinez, we got a problem here," Rodriguez called over the radio. "These bugs are all linked up somehow. When I hurt one, the others feel it." "Copy that, Rodriguez. Think you can use that against them?" "Already am. Watch this." Rodriguez had rigged several captured creatures with small explosive devices. When the main hive force advanced, he triggered the explosives. The creatures died, but their pain and confusion flooded through the network to hundreds of others. The entire assault slowed down as creatures stopped to process the unexpected sensory overload. Back on the orbital station, Zethka watched in amazement as the unstoppable hive assault began to falter. The creatures were still adapting, but they could not adapt fast enough. Every time they developed a defense against one human tactic, the humans switched to something completely different. "Sir," Veltar reported with excitement in her voice, "the hive assault is retreating." "Retreating?" Zethka could not believe it. "The hive has never retreated." "They are pulling back to their secondary positions, sir. The assault has failed." For the first time in 3 months, a hive attack had been stopped. Not by superior technology or greater numbers, but by 12 soldiers who seemed to fight by completely different rules. "Get me Squad Leader Martinez," Zethka ordered. When the connection was established, Martinez sounded slightly out of breath but otherwise normal. "Yes, Commander?" "Squad Leader, my tactical officers are trying to understand your strategy. Could you explain how you stopped that assault?" "Simple, Commander. You have been fighting them like they are normal soldiers. But they are not soldiers. They are more like a computer program. Very good at processing information and adapting, but not good at handling random data." "Random data?" "Yeah. We keep changing our tactics faster than they can adapt. Every few minutes we do something completely different. They cannot build a defense against something that has no pattern." Zethka thought about this. Coalition forces had always prided themselves on discipline and standard procedures. Everyone knew their role. Every weapon had its proper use. Every tactic followed established doctrine. The humans seemed to have no doctrine at all. Or rather, their doctrine was to have no doctrine. "Squad Leader, are you saying that your lack of standardized procedures is actually an advantage?" Martinez laughed. "Commander, where we come from, the enemy gets a vote in every battle. Plans only work until the shooting starts. After that, you improvise." Improvise. It was not a word that appeared often in coalition military manuals. But watching the tactical display, Zethka could see that improvisation had accomplished what months of careful planning had not. The Hive was learning. But for the first time, they were learning that there was an enemy they could not easily adapt to. An enemy that refused to be predictable. 3 days after the first failed Hive assault, Zethka made a decision that went against everything he had learned in 40 years of military service. He ordered his remaining battalions to follow human tactical advice. It was not an easy choice. The humans had no rank that he recognized. Their equipment was primitive. Their procedures seemed to change every hour. But they had done something impossible. They had made the Hive retreat. Squad Leader Martinez stood in the Coalition Command Center, looking completely out of place among the sophisticated holographic displays and quantum computers. His armor was scratched and dirty. His weapons looked like museum pieces. But when he spoke, even veteran coalition officers listened. "The key thing to understand," Martinez explained to the gathered commanders, "is that adaptation takes time. Even for these creatures. If you can change your tactics faster than they can adapt, you stay ahead of them." Commander Corval of the 2nd Battalion raised a question. "But our doctrine requires standardized procedures. How can we coordinate our forces if every unit does something different?" "You do not coordinate," Martinez replied simply. "You let each unit commander make decisions based on what they see in front of them. Trust your people to figure out what works." The Zelkarian officers looked uncomfortable. Their military culture was built on precise coordination and following orders exactly as given. The idea of letting individual commanders make tactical decisions seemed like chaos. "But what if they make mistakes?" asked Captain Yelton. "They will make mistakes," Martinez said with a shrug. "But mistakes you can learn from are better than perfect execution that gets predictable." Zethka decided to test the human approach with 1 battalion. The 3rd Battalion was his most experienced unit, commanded by Major Quindar, who had fought alongside Zethka in 2 previous wars. "Major, I want you to work with the humans on the next Hive attack," Zethka ordered. "Follow their lead, adapt their methods." Major Quindar was not happy about the assignment, but he followed orders. When the Hive launched their next assault, his battalion was positioned alongside the 12 humans in the most dangerous sector of the battlefield. What Quindar learned in the next 6 hours changed his understanding of warfare forever. The humans taught his soldiers things that were not in any military manual. Corporal Chen showed them how to use collapsed buildings as weapons by rigging them to fall on advancing enemies. Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated what he called fighting dirty, using the enemy's own tactics against them. But the most shocking lesson came from a human called Specialist Torres. She was an engineer who seemed to view the entire battlefield as a construction project that needed to be demolished. "See that hive communication tower?" Torres pointed to a biomechanical structure rising from the enemy lines. "That is their network hub for this sector. Take it down, and all the creatures in a 2-kilometer radius lose coordination." Major Quindar studied the tower through his tactical scope. "It is heavily defended. A direct assault would cost us half a battalion." "Who said anything about a direct assault?" Torres grinned. "Watch and learn." What Torres did next was not taught in any engineering school that Quindar knew about. She used mining explosives captured from the human crash site, combined with Zelkarian energy cells, to create what she called improvised demolition charges. Instead of attacking the tower directly, she placed the charges in the underground tunnel system that supported it. 20 minutes later, the entire hive communication network for the northern sector collapsed into a crater 50 meters wide. "How did you know that would work?" Quindar asked in amazement. "I did not," Torres admitted. "But the worst that could happen was we would blow up some tunnels. Best case, we take down their command structure. Risk was worth taking." Risk was worth taking. Another concept that did not appear in coalition military doctrine. Zelkarian forces were trained to minimize risk, not embrace it. But as the battle continued, Quindar began to understand what the humans meant. His soldiers started making their own decisions instead of waiting for orders. When Private Helmus saw an opportunity to flank a group of hive creatures, he took it without asking permission. When Sergeant Velkar noticed that the enemy was vulnerable to crossfire from an unexpected angle, she moved her squad immediately. The results were dramatic. For the first time since the war began, coalition forces were advancing instead of retreating. The hive creatures could not adapt fast enough to counter tactics that kept changing. "Major Quindar to command," came the radio call that made Zethka's day. "3rd Battalion has secured the mining facility. Repeat, we have taken back the mining facility." Impossible. The mining facility had been in hive hands for 2 months. It was surrounded by their strongest defenses and thousands of creatures. "How many casualties, Major?" Zethka asked, dreading the answer. 17 wounded, sir. No dead." 17 wounded. To retake a facility that had cost them 3 full battalions to defend originally. "Major, how did you accomplish this?" There was a pause before Quindar replied. "Sir, we fought like humans." By the end of the week, all remaining coalition forces were working with human advisors. Marine Williams was teaching suppressive fire techniques to the heavy weapons teams. Corporal Chen was showing infantry squads how to use urban terrain to their advantage. Sergeant Rodriguez was training special forces units in what he called unconventional warfare. But the most important lesson came from Martinez himself during a commander's meeting. "You have been fighting to minimize casualties," he told the assembled Zelkarian officers. "That is good. Lives matter. But sometimes to save more lives, you have to risk some lives. Sometimes the safest thing to do is the most dangerous thing to do." Zethka thought about this as he watched the tactical displays. In just 1 week, the impossible had become routine. Coalition forces were not just holding their ground anymore. They were taking back territory. The hive was retreating on multiple fronts. All because 12 humans had taught them that rules were meant to be broken. 7 days after the humans crashed their ship into a hive complex, Commander Zethka received a message he had thought impossible. It came from the planet's surface, transmitted from the main hive coordination center that had been the enemy's primary stronghold. "Commander, this is Squad Leader Martinez. The area is secure. Hive forces have abandoned the planet." Zethka stared at the communication panel in disbelief. "Squad Leader, please repeat that message." "The hive is gone, sir. They pulled out about an hour ago, left in some kind of bioships that grew out of the ground. Never seen anything like it. Abandoned the planet. The Hive had never abandoned anything. In 17 star systems, across hundreds of worlds, they had never retreated from a conquest. They adapted, they learned, they overwhelmed. But they never gave up. "Veltar, confirm the readings," Zethka ordered. His communications officer worked at her console for several minutes before looking up with wonder in her eyes. "Sir, I am detecting no Hive biosignatures on the planet's surface. The underground tunnel networks appear to be empty. The biomechanical structures are going dormant." "They really left," Captain Mordex whispered. "After 3 months of constant war, they just left." Zethka felt something he had not experienced in months. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that made his legs weak and his hands shake. They had won. Somehow, impossibly, they had won. But even as he celebrated, part of his mind was already working on the implications. If 12 humans could drive off the Hive, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? What did it mean for warfare itself? "Sir, we are receiving multiple communications from Coalition Command," Veltar reported. "They want a full report on how we defeated the Hive." "How did you explain the impossible? How did you write a report that said traditional military doctrine was wrong, that everything the galaxy had learned about warfare over thousands of years had been turned upside down by 12 soldiers with primitive weapons?" "Schedule a full debrief for tomorrow," Zethka decided. "I want every human advisor present, and I want detailed recordings of their tactical methods." The next day, the main briefing room was packed with Coalition officers from across the sector. Word had spread quickly that the unstoppable Hive had been defeated. Everyone wanted to know how. Squad leader Martinez stood at the front of the room, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. He was still wearing his battered armor and carrying his simple kinetic weapons. Next to the advanced Zelkarian officers in their pristine uniforms, he looked like a relic from a primitive age. "The key to understanding human military doctrine," Martinez began, "is that we do not really have military doctrine. We have principles, but principles are not the same as rules." A Zelkarian colonel raised his hand. "Could you explain the difference?" "Rules tell you what to do in specific situations," Martinez replied. "Principles tell you how to think about any situation. Rules make you predictable. Principles make you adaptable." Another officer asked, "But how do you coordinate large-scale operations without standardized procedures?" Martinez smiled. "You train your people to think, not just to follow orders. You give them objectives, not detailed instructions. You trust them to figure out how to get the job done." The questions went on for hours. How did human forces maintain unit cohesion without rigid command structures? How did they coordinate complex operations when every unit was doing something different? How did they prevent chaos when everyone was improvising? The answers were simple but revolutionary. Human military thinking was built around the idea that no plan survived contact with the enemy. So instead of making better plans, they made better soldiers. Soldiers who could think, adapt, and improvise under pressure. "Your technology is impressive," Martinez told the assembled commanders. "Your weapons are centuries ahead of ours. Your ships are faster, your armor is stronger, your sensors are more precise, but you fight like you are afraid to lose. We fight like we are not allowed to lose." General Morthov of the Coalition Strategic Command asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Squad Leader Martinez, would your government be willing to provide military advisors to Coalition forces? The Hive threat extends across 17 star systems. We need these tactics." Martinez shook his head. "That is not my decision to make, sir. But I can tell you what Earth Command will probably say." He activated his communication device and sent a message back to human space. The reply came within an hour, transmitted across thousands of light years of space. "Earth Command to Coalition forces," the message began. "Request for human military advisors is denied. You asked for reinforcements to handle a local problem. You did not ask for an army to restructure galactic warfare. The coalition officers looked confused. General Morthuv asked, "What does that mean exactly?" Martinez translated. "It means you need to figure this out for yourselves. We showed you that it could be done. Now it is up to you to learn how to do it." Over the following days, as coalition forces began implementing human tactical principles, reports started coming in from other systems. The Hive was retreating everywhere, not just from Kepler 442c, but from battlefields across the galaxy where they had been advancing unopposed for months. Somehow, the defeat of a single Hive force had affected their entire species. The biomechanical collective consciousness that made them so dangerous had also become their weakness. When one group learned that humans could not be easily defeated, that knowledge spread to all of them. The galaxy was safe, for now. But as Zethka watched the human ship prepare to depart, he realized that everything had changed. The age of predictable warfare was over. From now on, military success would belong to those who could adapt fastest, think most creatively, and take the greatest risks. "Squad Leader Martinez," Zethka said over the communication channel. "Thank you." "For everything." "Just doing our job, Commander," Martinez replied. "But remember what you learned here. The next time you face an enemy that seems unstoppable, do not try to outfight them with better weapons. Outthink them with better ideas." The human ship lifted off and disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be quite the same. In the final intelligence report filed about the incident, deep space monitoring stations noted that Hive expansion had stopped completely. For the first time in their recorded history, the biomechanical swarm was retreating toward the galactic rim, running from something they could not adapt to, running from humanity.